Drake stepped onto the surface of the strange moon, where the air felt heavy and the sky glowed in purple and orange colors. His boots pressed into the soft red soil as his eyes scanned the silent alien field around him. No sign of life appeared on his scanner, but something in the air felt alive. He walked carefully through glowing red plants that looked like jelly but moved like they were breathing. A soft wind brushed his helmet, but there was no breeze. His heart beat faster as he held his pulse rifle tightly in both hands. He saw her. Then a girl, sitting on a black stone in the middle of the glowing field. She was young, maybe 17, with pale silver skin and long hair that moved slowly like it was underwater. Her dress looked like it was made from thin glass, and her eyes were large and deep green like forests after the rain. She smiled at him gently and raised one hand in peace. Drake hesitated and then lowered his rifle a little. She looked harmless, like a lost traveler or someone left behind. His gums buzzed with static, but no voice came through. He took one step forward, and she smiled wider but said nothing. He opened his mouth to speak. She raised a finger to her lips and whispered very softly in a calm tone that didn't match the warning in her words, "Please don't talk." Drake frowned. He took another step and said in a calm voice, "My name is Drake. I'm not here to hurt you." Girl's smile changed not into a frown, into something strange. Her eyes shimmered then. She whispered again, one word. "One word is all it takes. My monster will tear you apart." The ground beneath Drake's feet shivered. A deep low growl came from the earth itself, like something was alive just under the surface. Wraith raised his rifle. Again, quickly, he scanned the area. No life signs, but the growl got louder. Red jelly plants started shaking around him and the soil began to crack open near the black stone where the girl sat. She stood now, slowly, still, smiling. She took a few steps toward him, and the ground behind her healed itself like nothing had moved her. Voice came again, calm and soft. "You need to be quiet here. It listens to sound. It reacts to speech. Ivan, your thoughts are loud." Drake swallowed hard and nodded. He did not speak this time. His instincts screamed at him to run, but something about the girl held him in place. Maybe it was the way she moved without fear, or how the monster seemed to stay calm while she stood close to it. She looked at him with kind eyes, but something inside those eyes did not match the warmth. There was sorrow there and a warning. Warning. She pointed toward the east where jagged hills stood like broken teeth in the distance. "The tower is that way. If you want to live, we must walk together." No words, only steps. Drake followed her. As they walked, the air became colder. The wind sounded like whispers and the soil turned black around them. Strange, bone-like trees grew from the ground and bent toward them as if listening. Drake kept his rifle ready, but somehow he knew it was useless. Here the girl moved like she belonged in this place, like she was part of it. They walked for what felt like an hour in silence. Drake tried to speak once, to ask her name, but she turned to him quickly. Her smile was Ganand. Her eyes were full of fear. She mouthed the word no and placed a finger on his lips. Growl returned faintly in the distance. He stayed silent. They reached a shallow ridge and she motioned him to duck. Below them was a small crater. Inside the crater lay bones, hundreds of bones, some human, some not, all piled in silence. Drake felt cold sweat on his back. She whispered again. They all spoke. They all ignored the warning. She turned to him again, and this time her smile was gentle again, but tired. "You will survive if you listen, but you will suffer if you doubt." Drake nodded again. Still no words. The sky above them turned darker. 2 moons now shined above. The air grew heavier. They moved forward into the shadows, toward the tower, and toward whatever secret this alien girl carried behind her. Strange warning, and that quiet, dangerous smile. Drake moved behind the girl through the twisting, dark path, where shadows stretched like fingers across the black soil, while strange trees bent low and seemed to whisper in a language only the wind could hear. And the deeper they walked, the more the silence pressed on his chest. like a heavy stone that would not lift no matter how. Deep he breathed. The girl walked ahead with quiet steps, like she had done this journey before, like the ground knew her, like the monster beneath. The surface respected her silence and feared her voice, and still she said nothing, only raised a hand. Once in a while to guide him or stop him, or point at something hidden beneath the surface like a vein of danger. Ready to bleed, Drake had many questions. He wanted to ask her name. He wanted to ask why the bones had been there. He wanted to ask what the monster was, and why it listened to her, but not to him. But every time he opened his mouth, a small vibration tickled the back of his neck, like a warning, like the land itself whispered into his skull and begged him not to break the quiet, or the world around him would break in steady. Followed her through a narrow tunnel, made of stone and roots, where the air smelled like wet iron and old smoke, and inside the tunnel something shifted in the shadows, and he stopped. The girl turned around slowly and looked at him with calm eyes that said more than words ever could, and she raised her hand with 2 fingers and pointed at the roof of the tunnel, where a row of small black creatures hung like bats with thin wings and no faces, and long fingers that twitched even when they slept. Drake stared at them and nodded, and they moved through the tunnel without making a sound, and the deeper they went, the more the air began to hum like a quiet song played on broken strings, and the girl pressed a hand to the wall, and the wall opened like soft flesh, revealing a chamber filled with crystals, glowing blue and green and red in random pulses like they were breathing. She stepped inside and waited for him to follow, and when he entered the room, the crystals stopped glowing, and the chamber became still, and the only light came from the glow in the girl's skin and eyes, and she finally spoke in a voice barely louder than breath. "This place listens to thought. You may speak, but only with care." Drake looked around confused and unsure, and he asked her in a low voice how this place was possible, and what this moon was, and why the monster followed her command and not his. Girl did not answer at once. Instead, she walked to a tall crystal and placed her hand on it, and the crystal lit up and showed a vision. A younger version of the girl stood inside the vision. She was running from something dark, something made of smoke and tendrils and screams. She ran across a shattered planet. She ran into a crack in the ground. She found the creature there. It was bound and chained and buried and angry, but it was still alive, and she spoke one word to it, one word that no other living thing had dared speak. Tand. The creature stopped screaming. It listened, and then it followed the vision. Ended. The girl turned to Drake and said in the same soft voice, "Made a deal. The monster guards me because I gave it something it wanted. A name, a banda, place to belong. But it is not loyal to anyone else. To we speak too much, it will hear you, and if it hears you, it will think you are trying to take me, and it does not forgive." Drake asked her what the creature truly was. She answered only with one sentence, "It's the last of its kind, and I am the last of mine." She walked to another wall, and the wall slid open like a curtain made of dust and stars, and behind it stood a narrow bridge leading over a dark pit that had no end. Sound from below was like breathing, slow and deep and patient. Drake stepped onto the bridge behind her. Each step echoed like thunder in his chest. He dared not look down, but he knew the creature was there, waiting, listening, feeling his heartbeat, measuring his fear. The girl stopped halfway and turned to him. Smile returned, but this time it was not kind. It was sad, almost broken. She said, "The tower is near, but the path gets harder. Your voice will betray you if your heart is not quiet." Drake nodded. No words now, just breath, just silence, just fear. They walked the rest of the bridge in silence, while something large shifted in the deep below. The girl reached the end first and stepped onto solid ground. Drake followed on, just as his boot touched the edge. Entire bridge behind them crumbled, falling into the dark, swallowed whole, gone without a sound. The sky above turned darker than before, as if night had fallen without warning, while two moons hovered in silence, and the air felt cold, like breath frozen in the throat, and Drake walked close behind the alien girl, who now moved slower than before. Her steps cautious, her shoulders tense, her hands always near the ground, like she could feel something rising below. They moved through a narrow valley filled with tall rock towers that looked like statues broken by time and buried halfway in dust, and bones of things that were once alive but no longer remembered, and the silence was now too deep, too wide, like the air itself was afraid to echo. Drake wanted to ask her something he had wanted to ask since he met her, what her name was, who she really was, what she had lost, and what she had become, but the words stayed stuck in his throat until his fear cracked under pressure, and he whispered the question into the cold air behind her. What is your name? She froze, her body stiffened like stone. She turned slowly, eyes wide, not with anger, but fear, and she whispered back with a trembling voice, "You said, Heidi told you not to speak. Heidi told you never to ask. But you did. You spoke, and now it has heard." Any sound came then from the rocks behind them, low at first like wind moving through hollow pipes, then louder, deeper, like a roar muffled by soil, like claws dragging across the skin of the world. Drake stepped back, but the girl held out her hand. "Too late," she said. "Too late for silence. It has woken." Drake looked around the valley, and everything had changed. The rocks were moving, the dust rose like smoke, and the bones began to shake, and the ground split open near one of the tall statues, revealing a long black limb covered in smooth armor, like polished stone and lined with deep scars that glowed red. The creature pulled itself from the earth slowly, as if enjoying the moment, as if it remembered the taste of fear and missed it, and Drake watched as it rose higher than the towers, with too many eyes and a mouth that did not open but somehow breathed hunger. The girl stood still, her voice calm but filled with sorrow, as she whispered, "Not to Drake, but to the thing. You are not needed. Go back." The creature did not move, watched her, then looked at Drake, then back at her, and it spoke without lips, using the sound of thunder wrapped in silk. "He asked your name. He broke the rule. He wants to know you. He wants to take you." Drake shouted back, "No, I do noti. Was only asking you. Meant no harm." The creature roared, and the ground shook, and its many legs stepped forward, crushing bones and statues and history in one breathless movement. The girl turned to Drake and grabbed his hand and pulled him forward. "We must run. Now you cannot calm it only. I can, and I do not know if it will listen any more." They ran through the valley as the monster followed with slow, heavy steps that made the rocks fall and the sky blink and the very air scream. And Drake ran without knowing where, only knowing he had made a mistake, and now death followed like a shadow. With claws they reached a narrow tunnel between two cliffs, and the girl turned and placed her palm on the stone, and the tunnel lit up with glowing symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat, and the wall opened just enough for them to slip through, and then closed behind them, sealing out the sound and the sky, and the monster, for now inside, was quiet again, but not safe. The girl let go of his hand and stepped away, breathing fast, eyes filled with pain. "You asked my name," she said. "Now it knows you care. That is enough for it to see you as a rival." Lay threat. Drake sat down against the wall, hands shaking, breath short, heart loud in his chest like a drum of panic. "Just wanted to know who you were," he said softly. Her voice was quiet, almost kind. "Now was someone once before the pact, before I gave the creature a name so it could have shape, and in return I gave mine. Now it belongs to it, and it to me, but it wants more. It once someone knew the tunnel was long and narrow, filled with the sound of dripping water that did not fall from anywhere, and wind that did not come from behind." And Drake walked beside the girl without speaking, without thinking, without dinking, without daring to breathe too loudly, because the silence was no longer a shield. It had become a curse, and he had broken it, and now something old and angry was awake. She moved like she knew the path by heart, like her feet could remember what her mind wanted to forget, and her hands brushed the walls, now and then leaving behind glowing trails of blue light that faded slowly like fireflies trapped in stone. And every time she touched the wall, the sound changed a little, like the tunnel was alive. Like it responded to her sadness, Drake kept his eyes forward and his heart low, but his thoughts were loud, louder than his footsteps, louder than his fear, and the deeper they went, the more he felt it. Something following, not with feet, but with whispers, with breath, with memory. Then it happened, Day voice, not hers, not his, but hers again, calling his name. Drake stopped and looked at her, but she had not spoken. She looked back, confused, then angry, then afraid, and she grabbed his arm tight and shook her head. No words. She mouthed, no echo, no answer. But the voice came again. Drake, help. Meet. This time it was different. It was not the girl's voice. It was the voice of his sister, the one who died years ago on Earth. One he had buried in a storm when he was just a child. Her voice was soft, broken, afraid. He turned again, searching for the source, but the tunnel was empty, and the girl pulled his hand and pointed ahead and whispered, it speaks, now it uses your past, it wants your sorrow, do not let it win. But the voice returned again, louder. Closer, he saw a shadow move at the corner of his eye. Then another voice came, a friend from his academy days, then a commander he once served under, then his mother. One by one, voices he had not heard in years. All crying out, all begging, all whispering secrets only he could know. His knees weakened, he fell against the wall and covered his ears. The girl crouched beside him and took his face in her hands and stared into his eyes. You must fight it, she said, without speaking, just moving her lips slowly with carrot. Is testing you. If you speak now, it will find your soul and tear it apart. Drake tried to breathe, tried to block the voices, but they were inside now, not outside. And the tunnel changed again. The walls cracked and twisted like flesh. The lights faded and were replaced by shadows that pulsed like veins. Then the monster spoke, not in his ears, but in his mindine, a place deeper than thought you want. He wants. She thinks she is innocent. She can be saved, but she belongs to me. Say her name again, and she is yours. Say it loud, and I will leave you. Betray screamed inside his own skull, but made no sound. He looked at the girl and saw that she too was hearing the same words, because her eyes were wet and her hands trembled and her lips moved silently in prayer. He stood again and leaned on the wall and nodded to her. Let's keep going, he mouthed without sound. She led the way again, and the tunnel turned and twisted like a snake of stone, and eventually they reached a chamber filled with mirrors that were not mirrors, because they reflected nothing, and instead showed memories, both his and hers. As they walked past, he saw her alone as a child, standing before a great black altar. He saw the creature in chains, roaring with hunger. He saw her offering her name on her knees, whispering into the dark. He saw her eyes before and after, and how they had changed. She saw him, to his memories open like wounds, his childhood, his loss, his loneliness, his shame, and she did not look away. The mirrors cracked one by one as they passed, and behind each crack a whisper escaped and followed them. They reached the center of the chamber, where a spiral staircase made of light floated in the air, leading upward into nothing. She pointed and began to climb. He followed. Each step made his mind lighter and heavier at once. Memories rose like ghosts around him, but he kept walking. At the top was a doorway with no frame, only light. She touched it, it opened, and outside was a sky of stars, with no ground, just floating stones and drifting light. And far ahead, in the middle of this space, was the tower, glowing blue and silver. She turned to him. One more path, she said, on one last silence. What? Nodded and stepped into the stars. Someone stronger, and you woke that hunger. Drake looked up at her and saw not just an alien girl, but something older, something tired, something powerful, held together by silence and secrets and sorrow. She sat beside him, and for a long time neither spoke. Outside, The walls the monster moved, searching, waiting hungry inside the tunnel. They rested on above them, the moons turned slowly, and the stars began to blink, like eyes watching everything unfold. Stars floated all around like glowing fireflies, lost in time, while Drake stepped carefully across drifting stones that held no weight, no ground, no sound. And behind him, the girl moved. Slowly, eyes wide, watching the space with fear not of falling, but of remembering, and her hands stayed close to her chest, as if holding something invisible, something fragile, something sacred. They had left the tunnel and entered something older. Something beyond logic, something built not of stone or metal, but of thought and dream, and inside this space nothing made sense except the silence which still followed them like a shadow with breath. Drake stepped onto a larger platform where broken pieces of earth floated around him like forgotten memories, and he saw a tree from his childhood yard, and a swing and a small red ball that bounced once, then stopped in midair, and he heard a laugh. His own laugh as a boy, and turned quickly, but saw no one. The girl warned him with her hand again, and pointed ahead, where a narrow path of light curved toward the tower that stood still and tall in the distance, glowing like a cold sun. But Drake could not move, because he heard another voice, now not a whisper, not a trick, not a shadow. It was her voice again, his sister, calling from behind the tree, and when he turned, he saw her small form running toward him, arms open, eyes full of joy, like nothing had changed, like no years had passed, like no grave had ever been dug. He stepped forward, just one step, just to see. And the ground shifted, and the light dimmed, and the stars blinked, and the girl shouted without sound, and ran to pull him back, but he reached out first. His hand touched the shadow of his sister, and everything stopped. The stars froze, the path vanished. Girl screamed inside his mind, and then came the cold. Drake fell backward into nothing, into memory, into a place that was not real, but felt more real than anything else. And suddenly he was a child again, standing in the rain, holding a broken toy, crying, alone in the corner of a burned room, and his father stood there shouting, and his mother cried, and the storm outside broke the windows. Turned and saw the girl there too, now not as herself, but as a figure of light and sorrow, and she walked through his memories like a ghost, reading the pain like a book, and she reached for him and pulled him from the memory, and the pain shattered, and the stars returned. Drake gasped and fell to his knees, and the girl knelt beside him and touched his forehead with her hand, and the warmth from her skin pushed the cold away. This place is not made of stone, she said with her eyes. It is built from what we hide, from what we fear, from what we miss. It traps those who try to feel too much. You must be still inside, or you will drown. He nodded slowly and stood again and followed her as the path returned. Step by step, glowing softly beneath their feet like trust being rebuilt, and the tower came closer with each breath, with each silence. But the path was not done. They passed through a field of floating mirrors that showed not reflections but possibilities. One showed Drake holding the girl's hand, walking through green forests on a peaceful world. Another showed him in a cage while the monster stood behind him, with her eyes now red and empty. Another showed the earth burning while the creature laughed with her voice. Drake looked away and walked faster. He did not want to see what could be, only what must be. The girl touched one of the mirrors, and it cracked inside. It showed her alone, standing before the tower, while the stars blinked out one by one, and her face, aged, and her body turned to dust, and the monster stood still at her side, watching but not mourning. She looked away and wiped her cheek. Then they reached the final gate, a doorway made of crystalline sound, and every step closer made it sing with voices of the past, and the future, and the forgotten, and the forbidden. And the gate pulsed with emotion, with memory, with choice. Drake stopped and turned to the girl. What happens when we enter? He asked with his eyes. She answered by taking his hand and placing it on her chest, where her heartbeat was fast and steady inside. "The tower is the end," she said, with a look or at the beginning, depending on what you say, depending on what you feel, depending on what you are willing to lose. He nodded again, and together they stepped through the gate. And the sound faded, and the stars held their breath, and the monster far behind felt the shift and moved slowly toward them, through the dream space, through the memories, through the trap. Because the real battle had not yet begun, the tower stood tall in silence, made of crystal and shadow and old promises, with its surface changing shape like water frozen mid-fall. And as Drake stepped inside with the girl by his side, the walls lit up with soft blue lines that moved with their breath, as if the tower itself was alive and listening. They walked through a hall that curved upward, without steps, with no floor, only light holding them steady, and each step forward brought flashes in the air of people who once stood here, faces made of light, eyes filled with questions, hands reaching out to the girl like they knew her or feared her, or both. The girl kept her gaze ahead without blinking, her face calm, but her fingers clenched tightly around something Drake could not see, and when he asked her with his eyes what she held, she only looked down and shook her head slowly, like the answer was not ready yet, like the truth would cost too much too soon. At the top of the curved path was a room with no doors and no roof, just stars above and echoes below, and in the center was a platform made of black stone where an ancient machine hovered, spinning slowly with a hum that matched Drake's heartbeat. And the moment they stepped on the stone, the machine stopped and spoke. "Unauthorized entry detected. Guardian unit, active subject Kelra present." Kelra looked up, her name now spoken aloud by the machine for the first time since the journey began, and Drake felt the name ring in his bones like a bell struck underwater. And he looked at her with wide eyes and finally understood that her silence had never been for safety alone, but for survival. The machine continued. "You brought the beast here, you broke the lock, you triggered the cycland." Now the seal Wecon Skelvra stepped forward and placed her hand on the machine, and the spinning began again. Slower this time, deeper. She spoke not to the machine, but to Drake, her voice clear but soft, like someone waking from a long dream long ago, before the stars faded and the worlds fell. "I found the creature buried beneath my dying city, screaming without sound, full of hunger, but not for flesh, for meaning. For shape, for purpose, was a ghost with no anchor, a storm with no sky, and I was just a girl running from fire with no name worth remembering, until I gave it mine." She paused, and the machine pulsed. "Once you did what was forbidden," said the voice. Now quieter, almost sad. "You bonded with the void, you made it part of you." She nodded. "I was alone, and it was empty, and together we became something more. It protected me. It listened to me, but in time it grew stronger and I grew weaker, and now it wants more. It wants to replace me with another." Drake stepped beside her, now understanding too late the weight of every step they had taken, and he looked into her eyes and saw the cracks forming not in her body, but in her soul, and he asked without words, "What could be done?" Kelra turned to the machine and asked what the price was to restore the balance. The machine hesitated, as if even it feared the answer. Then it spoke. "You must transfer the bond. The void must belong to someone, or it will belong to everyone. Needs hunger will not end. Whispers will spread. One must carry it inside forever." Drake looked at Kelra, and she looked at him, and for the first time, she reached out and touched his face, and he saw in her touch not just a request, but a story. A history, a life lived in silence and shadow for the sake of a universe that never thanked her. He nodded slowly and stepped onto the center of the platform, where the air thickened and the light bent, and the machine released a beam that wrapped around his chest like a band of fire and frost and memory. And Kelra stepped back and whispered her name one final time. "Man." The darkness came. It fell from the stars and rose from the earth at once, a shape of teeth and wind and sorrow, with a face that shifted every moment between rage and grief and laughter, and it screamed without sound as the bond began to shift. Rake began to shift. Drake stood still, eyes closed, heart open, letting the beast see him, feel him, and the creature stopped moving and stared, and for one brief moment it bowed. The bond took hold, and Kelra fell to her knees, breathing hard, eyes wide, hands shaking. The machine powered down, and the stars above returned to their rhythm. Drake stood taller, now, not heavier, but different. Something inside him had changed. The whispers were quiet now, waiting, not screaming. Kelra looked up and smiled, a real smile, not broken, not tired, but free. You did not have to, she said. He smiled back and said nothing, because now he understood the silence and he understood the cost. The tower faded behind them like a forgotten dream as Drake and Kelra stood on the edge of a wide stone bridge that hung between stars and silence, while the light beneath their feet pulsed slowly like a heartbeat shared between two souls now forever connected. And around them, the void held its breath, waiting, watching, listening. Kelra walked ahead, her steps slow, her back straight, but her shoulders heavy, as if leaving the tower had taken something from her, something deep, something she could never recover. And Drake followed close behind, his eyes fixed on the path, his chest burning with the weight of the new bond now curled inside him like a sleeping storm that hummed with power and pain. He could feel it moving in the corners of his thoughts, not loud, not cruel, just there, waiting, not hungry, but awake, no longer bound to rage, but still filled with ancient sorrow. And he knew that silence alone would not hold it forever, that choice, not chains, was now the only way forward. Path led them to a platform that floated in the center of a swirling sky, where the stars above formed a circle and the stars below mirrored them perfectly, like two halves of the same wound. And at the heart of the platform stood a figure, cloaked in silver shadow, with no face, only a voice that wrapped around them like mist. You are here at the end, the voice said, or perhaps the beginning. The outcome depends on the final word. Kelra stepped forward and bowed her head, not in submission, but in farewell, and the figure turned toward her, and then toward Drake, and the light bent between them. Bond has changed it, said the beast, has been carried. The silence has been honored, but the hunger remains, and only one word can shape what comes. Next, Drake stood still and felt the creature shift inside him, not fighting, not pushing, just listening. And Kelra looked at him, eyes full of something beyond fear, beyond hope, something like love, but older, like it had grown from soil and stone and shadow. And she reached out and touched his chest where the bond lived. You must choose, she whispered, not for me, not for yourself, but for what we might become if we survive this. Drake closed his eyes and heard them all at once, the memories, the voices, the footsteps, the whispers, the pain, the names, the laughter, the monster, the girl, the silence, the stars. And in the middle of it all, he heard one word, not spoken, not taught, just felt, a word that was not a command, not a curse, not a prayer, was a gift. He opened his mouth and spoke the word, not loud, not soft, just truth. A moment stretched into forever. Sky cracked with light, the stars blinked once in shock, the figure of shadow stepped back, and the platform began to rise. The bond flared like fire in his blood, like ice in his spine, like time in reverse and forward at once. And the creature inside screamed, not in anger, but in release, as if it too had waited lifetimes for someone to see it, not as a weapon, not as a curse, but as a child. Lost in the dark, Kelra fell to her knees, tears in her eyes, not from sorrow, but from peace. And the figure dissolved into light, and the sky opened above them, and for the first time in many years, the moons did not watch in silence. They sang, breathed out, and felt the bond settle, not gone, not broken, but transformed, no longer chained by fear, but rooted in will. And Kelra stood again and looked at him, and smiled, not the smile of a girl who warned with a monster, but the smile of someone who could finally sleep without looking over her shoulder. They walked together toward the edge of the platform where a new path waited. One not made of stone or memory or sorrow, but of choice, a future of maybe. Behind them, the stars whispered stories A boy who asked a forbidden name of a girl who gave hers to a monster of a silence that saved more than it heard. A word that was never meant to destroy, but to heal. And the void listened, then the void wept, and the void slept, because even monsters can rest when given a name that means mercy, to be continued in memory and in silence, and in the hearts of those who still believe that one word can change everything.